I've been staring at a photo of a single Uniball Signo pen for the last 20 minutes. It's sitting on a generic laminate desk, the kind you see in every administrative office from here to the coast. But in this specific account, that pen is the last thing that made sense to the person holding it. I'm Elsie, and I've been building near-death experiences as a space for these specific jagged details that don't always fit into a tidy spiritual box. This account came to me 10 days ago from a woman named Victoria, and I've made the decision to keep her original phrasing exactly as it arrived, even when it feels a bit cold. Victoria worked as a business assistant in Victoria, and she's the type of person who values a well-organized spreadsheet over a vision. She was mid-sentence, taking notes on a conference call, when the world she spent 36 years organizing simply. The drawers were already open when I got there. That's the first thing I remember, not the light, but the sound of metal sliding against metal, thousands of times over, echoing in a space that didn't seem to have a floor. I was standing in a corridor that looked like it had been designed by someone who loved filing cabinets but hated people. It went on forever. If I looked up, there were just more rows, stacked so high they turned into a gray blur. I reached out to touch the edge of one drawer. It was cold, that brushed steel cold that sticks to your skin. And I realized I didn't have my headset on. I didn't have my pen. I didn't have my notes. I need to go back. I'm 36. Or I was. My name is Victoria. Up until May 15th, 2026, my life was measured in 15-minute increments on a Google Calendar. I worked on Government Street in Victoria in one of those ground-level offices where you can see the tourists through the window, but the glass is thick enough that you don't have to hear them. It was a Tuesday. It was one of those mornings where the air feels thin and sharp, like it might snap if you move too fast. I remember the smell of the office. It always smelled like ozone from the printer and that specific burnt sugar scent of the cheap vanilla creamer I kept in the mini fridge. I was at my desk by 8:15. I had my coffee, black, because I was trying to be disciplined that week, and I was logged into the 9 a.m. status call. My boss was talking about regional logistics. I was taking notes. I'm good at notes. I like the way the ink looks when it's perfectly aligned with the blue lines on the legal pad. Around 9:12, I felt this. It wasn't a pain. It was a weight. Like someone had walked up behind me and put their hands on my shoulders, then just kept leaning. I tried to shift my chair. I thought maybe my posture was off. I'd been sitting for 3 hours straight the day before, but the weight didn't move. It stayed right there, pressing down until the individual vertebrae in my neck. Then my vision went, not black. It went grainy, like an old security camera feed. I could still see the spreadsheet on my monitor, but the numbers were vibrating. The 8 in cell B14 was shaking so hard it looked like it was trying to crawl off the screen. I tried to reach for my water bottle, but my right hand, it just stayed on the desk. I was looking at it. I was telling it to move, but it just sat there, curled around my pen, looking like a piece of gray plastic. The sound in my headset changed. My boss's voice was still there, but it sounded like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. The audio was clipping. Every third word was just a burst of static. I remember thinking, I need to report this to IT, which is a ridiculous thing to think when your lungs have stopped working. I couldn't swallow. My throat felt like it had been lined with dry sand. I tried to take a breath, a real one, but the air wouldn't go past my collarbone. It just hit a wall and bounced back. There was a pop. Not loud. It was the sound a light bulb makes when it burns out in a quiet room. Just a tiny metallic tink. And then the silence wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. It was the kind of silence you feel in your teeth. I didn't feel my body hit the floor. I saw it happen, though. I've read through Victoria's transcript several times now, and there's a specific detail I keep circling back to. The way she describes noticing the audio clipping in her headset while she was literally losing the ability to breathe. I've noticed this in a lot of accounts from people with high-pressure administrative backgrounds. There's this internal reflex to troubleshoot the environment even as the self is dissolving. I found a message on a board for medical researchers a few months ago where someone, I think they went by the skeptic's lens, said that these sensory glitches are often the brain's final attempt to map a catastrophic system failure. But for Victoria, the glitch didn't stop with the audio. It was just the opening of a much larger record. I was standing near the ceiling tiles. I could see the dust on top of the hanging fluorescent lights, something I'd complained about to the building manager 3 times. I saw my glasses on the carpet. They'd fallen off when my face hit the laminate. One of the arms was bent at a weird angle. I looked at the person on the floor. Her blazer was bunched up under her armpits. Her legs were splayed out, and her left shoe, the black heel I just had resoled, was halfway off. She looked messy, unprofessional. I wanted to go down there and fix her hair, pull the blazer down so she looked respectable. I didn't feel any connection to her, really. It was like looking at a piece of equipment that had finally broken after years of being overused. Asset depreciated. That's what went through my head. The door to the office burst open. It was Sarah from accounting. She was screaming, but the sound was muffled, like she was behind a layer of thick plastic wrap. She dropped her mug. I saw the coffee splash across the beige carpet in slow motion, a dark, jagged stain. Then the paramedics were there. They looked so small from up by the ceiling. I watched them tear open her shirt, the white blouse I'd ironed that morning. They were putting pads on her chest. They were shouting numbers, 4 milligrams of something, 200 joules. I saw the needle go in. I saw the way her body jumped when the current hit. It was violent. It looked like someone had grabbed a rug and shook it out. But I wasn't in the body. I was watching the clock on the wall. The second hand was stuttering. It would move 2 seconds, then stop. Move 1, then stop. Then the pull started. It wasn't a gentle hand or a light. It felt like a vacuum, like the air pressure in the room had suddenly dropped, and I was being sucked through a straw. I didn't want to go. I hadn't finished the 9 a.m. notes. I hadn't filed the GST reports. But the ceiling didn't stop me. I went right through the dust and the wiring and the concrete, and suddenly the office was gone. The city of Victoria was beneath me for maybe a second. I saw the inner harbor, the blue water, the little yellow water taxis that looked like toys. Then the blue turned to gray, and the gray turned to that infinite corridor. I was back in the hallway of drawers, metal, cold, and echoing. I started walking because there wasn't anything else to do. My footsteps didn't make a sound. There was no wind, no heat, just the smell of old paper and ozone. I reached out and pulled on one of the drawer handles. It slid open without a sound. Inside, there weren't folders. There were strings of light, like fiber optic cables, all tangled together. I looked closer, and I realized the light was moving. It was a record, a video. I saw a man I didn't know, sitting in a kitchen in a city that looked like it was in Europe. He was crying. He was holding a piece of bread. I looked at the label on the front of the drawer. It was a series of numbers, 00-1488C. I closed the drawer. My hands were shaking, even though I didn't think I had hands. I pulled another one. This one was full of maps. They were interactive, pulsing with a dull red light. I saw the coast of Florida, then the coast of BC. The lines were shifting. The sea levels were moving up and down as I watched. It looked like a simulation, like a planning board. I realized then that this wasn't just a hallway. It was a warehouse. It was where the data for everything was kept before it was sent down to us. And the drawers were all open because someone was currently working on them. I looked down the long gray line of the corridor, and I saw a figure standing about 50 yards away. They were holding a clipboard. They weren't an angel. They looked like a clerk. They looked up at me, and their eyes were just empty, white spaces. They didn't seem surprised I was there. They just looked at their clipboard, then back at me, and then they pointed toward a door at the very end of the hall, a door that hadn't been there a second ago. It was a heavy, mahogany door, the kind you see in the executive suites of banks. I started walking toward it, and as I got closer, the sound of the metal drawers changed. It turned into a low hum, like a server room. Millions of bits of information being processed all at once. I put my hand on the brass knob of that door. It was warm. The first thing I'd felt that wasn't cold. I pushed it open. The room was larger than the office on Government Street, but it had the same energy. It was a boardroom. Polished stone floors, high ceilings, and a light that didn't cast any shadows. It made the room look like a high-end rendering, something you'd see in a real estate brochure for a building that hasn't been built yet. I walked in, and my heels made a sharp clicking sound against the stone. I wasn't wearing my heels, I knew that, but the sound was there. It was a rhythmic, steady click. It grounded me. It felt like a Tuesday morning. In the center of the room was a long table made of a material that looked like smoked glass. There were maybe a dozen figures sitting around it. They didn't have wings. They didn't have halos. They were wearing charcoal gray suits that were so well tailored, it made my skin feel itchy just looking at them. They didn't have faces in the way we do. If you looked directly at one of them, your eyes just sort of slid off, like trying to focus on a smudge on a window. But I could see their hands, long, thin fingers. They were moving across the surface of the glass table. The entire wall behind them was a screen. But it wasn't a screen. It was a window looking out at every logistics hub on the planet all at once. I saw the Port of Vancouver. I saw the rail yards in Chicago. I saw the grain elevators in the Ukraine. There were numbers floating over everything. Red numbers, green numbers. They were ticking up and down so fast I could barely read them. I walked closer. I wasn't afraid. I've been through 3 citywide audits and 2 corporate mergers. I know what a high-stakes meeting looks like. I just stood there at the end of the table, waiting for someone to acknowledge me, to give me a task or an agenda. One of the figures, the one at the head of the table, pointed a long finger at a section of the wall that showed a map of the Pacific Northwest. I saw Victoria. I saw the exact block where my office was. There was a little icon over a grocery store on Douglas Street. The icon was a loaf of bread with the red X through it. The figure spoke. His voice didn't come from a mouth. It arrived inside my head like a notification on a phone, clear and flat. The allocation for Q3 is being adjusted, he said. I looked at the table. Is there a supply chain issue? I asked. I was surprised at how steady my voice was. I sounded like I was asking about the printer paper order. There is no issue, the figure replied. There is only the schedule. He moved his hand across the table and the map zoomed out. I saw the whole world. It was covered in these little red X icons. They were blinking. It looked like a switchboard. The scarcity is a line item, he continued. It's a necessary metric for the next phase. If the population is fed, they are stagnant. If they are hungry, they are pliable. We are adjusting the margins to ensure maximum compliance. I watched as another figure reached out and slid a digital bar. Immediately, the price of fuel in 5 different countries jumped by 40%. I saw the ripple effect. I saw the trucks stopping. I saw the warehouses sitting empty. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a war or a drought. It was a deliberate administrative decision made by entities that looked like they were managing a hedge fund. I've been thinking about a comment I read on a video we did a few months ago. It was titled The Logistics of Life. A user named Admin99 wrote that they had a dream where the afterlife was just a massive cosmic bureaucracy where every human life was filed under a serial number. At the time, I thought it was just a metaphor for how they felt at their desk job. But when I read Victoria's description of the scheduling board, I realized they might have been describing the exact same corridor. It's unsettling to think that the chaos we see in the news isn't a failure of the system, but the system working exactly as intended. I've been carrying that thought for a week now, and it doesn't get any lighter. I stepped back from the table. My hand went to my throat, feeling for the lanyard I always wore at work. It wasn't there. My fingers just brushed against my collarbone. I felt a chill that started in my feet and moved up to my chest. You're managing the suffering, I said. My voice was still calm, but there was a crack in it now. You're filing it away like it's just data. The figure at the head of the table didn't look at me. He was watching a graph that showed the decline of small businesses in Northern Europe. Suffering is a high-yield asset, he said. It produces fear. Fear is the currency of the one we serve. Without it, the structures we are building would have no foundation. You should understand this, Victoria. You spent your life making sure the numbers balanced. We are doing the same. He turned a page on a digital ledger, and I saw my own name. It was at the bottom of a list labeled Active Transitions. Next to my name was a timer. It was counting down. Yoo-hoo! The audit is almost over, he said. Suddenly, the boardroom started to dissolve. Not into smoke, but into thin horizontal lines, like a television losing its signal. The figures in the suits stayed there, perfectly still, even as the walls around them vanished. I was back in the corridor, but it had changed. The drawers were gone. The walls were now made of a black, oily substance that looked like ink. I reached out to touch it, and my hand went right through. It felt like cold water, but thicker. It stuck to my fingers. I looked down at my hand, and I saw that the black ink was spreading. It was crawling up my arm, turning my skin into the same dark, shimmering material. I tried to shake it off, but it wouldn't move. It was becoming part of me. Then the sound returned. It wasn't the metal drawers anymore. It was the sound of a city being torn down. I heard the grinding of metal, the shattering of glass, and a low, rhythmic thumping that sounded like a giant heart beating underground. I looked ahead, and the corridor opened up into a space so vast I couldn't see the ceiling. It looked like a construction site for a city that was being built out of the black ink. There were thousands of people there. They were moving in perfect unison, carrying blocks of the black material. They didn't look like people. They looked like silhouettes. They had no faces, no voices. Above them, on a platform that looked like a crane made of bone, stood a man I recognized. I'd seen his face on the news 100 times. He was a prime minister. He was smiling. He was holding a glass of something amber-colored, and he was talking to another man I didn't recognize, but who looked just as powerful. They weren't building a city for people. They were building a cage. I tried to turn back to find the door to the boardroom, but the corridor was gone. There was only the construction site and the black ink rising around my ankles. It was heavy. It was pulling me down. I felt the weight of it in my lungs, the same weight I'd felt at my desk. I couldn't move my legs. I was being filed into the foundation. I tried to pull my feet out of the ink, but it wasn't just liquid anymore. It was becoming structural. It was hardening into blocks, into walls, into the very floor I was supposed to stand on. I looked up at the Prime Minister on the platform. He wasn't looking at the construction. He was looking at a tablet in his hand, his thumb scrolling through a feed of numbers. I realized he wasn't the architect. He was just a subcontractor, a middle manager. The scene shifted again. It didn't fade. It was like a jump cut in a video. 1 second, I was in the ink, and the next, I was standing in a high-rise office with floor-to-ceiling windows. I could see a city below me. It looked like a generic North American suburb. Cul-de-sacs, swimming pools, schools, with little yellow buses parked in rows. There were 2 men standing by the window. They were wearing polo shirts and slacks, looking like they'd just come off a golf course. One of them held a remote control. He pointed it at the window. "The inventory in this sector is too high," he said. "We need a market correction." He pressed a button. I watched a suburban block, maybe 30 houses, just collapse. It didn't look like an explosion. It looked like the houses were made of sand, and someone had poured water on them. They just slumped into the ground. I saw the dust rise. I saw the tiny shapes of cars being swallowed up. "What about the residents?" the other man asked. He sounded bored. He was checking his watch. "Relocated to the debt columns," the first man said. "They're more valuable as refugees than as homeowners right now. It drives the interest rates in the adjacent sectors. Look at the spike." He showed the other man a holographic graph that appeared in the air between them. I saw the red line shoot straight up. "Efficient," the second man said. "Let's do the east side next. I want that cleared by the lunch break." I walked toward them. I wanted to grab the remote. I wanted to tell them that I lived in a sector like that my mother lived in a sector like that. But my hand went right through the man's arm. He didn't even blink. He just kept scrolling through his corrections. I've been sitting with Victoria's description of that market correction for 2 days. And I have a question for you. Have you ever been watching the news, maybe a report on an economic crash or a sudden conflict, and had this localized feeling in your gut that the explanation you were being given didn't match the scale of the event? Like you were watching a play where the actors didn't know the script had already been written by someone in a room you'd never see? If you've had that specific feeling, I want you to share it with me in the comments. I'm Elsie, and I read every single one of those entries because I think the patterns you notice in the real world are often the only things that anchor these accounts to reality. The high-rise vanished. The golf shirts vanished. I was falling. It was that feeling when you're nearly asleep and you think you've missed a step on the stairs. That jolt that makes your heart hit your ribs. I landed on a cold white floor. The lights here were different. They were bright, clinical, and they had a slight blue tint to them. It was a laboratory. It looked like the research facilities I'd done the data entry for back in 2022. Rows of stainless steel tables, centrifuges spinning with a low, expensive hum, racks of glass vials. But there were no windows here, no exits. Just white walls and people in full-body hazmat suits moving with a mechanical precision that made my skin crawl. They weren't talking. They didn't need to. They were all synced to the same frequency. I could hear it, a low-pitched ringing in my ears that pulsed every 4 seconds. I walked over to the nearest table. My hands were back to being skin and bone, but I felt a film over them like I was wearing invisible gloves. On the table was a rack of vials labeled with QR codes. I looked at the batch numbers, LB47, MV22, MH19. I stopped. I knew those codes. I typed them into a procurement spreadsheet 3 weeks ago. I remember because the shipping address was a blind P.O. box in Zurich, and the freight cost was triple the value of the medical supplies listed on the manifest. I'd flagged it for my boss, and he told me to just file it and move on. One of the scientists, if that's what they were, picked up a vial labeled NV22. He held it up to the light. The liquid inside wasn't clear. It was a dull, bruised purple. It looked like it was vibrating. Batch 22 is ready for distribution, a voice said over the intercom. It wasn't a human voice. It was a synthesized corporate tone. Focus on the high-density transit hubs. We need the infection rate to peak during the holiday travel window. Maximum visibility, maximum panic. I reached out and tried to knock the vial out of the figure's hand. I screamed. I didn't care about being professional anymore. I didn't care about the notes or the schedule. "You can't do this," I yelled. My voice sounded thin and metallic in the sterile room. "That's a biological asset. You're treating people like units," the figure said. He didn't turn around, but his head tilted slightly. "We are in the business of quality control, Victoria, and the current population has too many defects. We need a reset, a clean slate for the new system." He placed the vial into a specialized shipping container, the same one I'd seen in the catalog at the office. He closed the lid with a snap. "The big release is scheduled for November," he said. "The fear will do the rest. They'll beg for the solution. They'll sign anything. They'll take any mark we give them just to make the coughing stop." I felt the room start to spin. The white walls began to press in. The low-pitched ringing in my ears got louder and louder until it was a roar. I looked down at my hands, and I saw the black ink from the foundation was back. It was bubbling under my fingernails. I wasn't a business assistant anymore. I wasn't an observer. I was being processed. I was being filed into the defect column. I fell to my knees. The white floor felt like ice. I closed my eyes and waited for the snap of the lid, for the moment I'd be labeled and put on a shelf in that infinite corridor. I couldn't breathe. That weight was back on my chest. The weight of 36 years of filing things away that I should have been screaming about. I opened my mouth to cry out, but only black ink came out. And then, through the roar of the ringing, I heard a footstep. It wasn't the click of a heel or the squeak of a hazmat suit. It was the sound of someone walking on dry grass. I looked up, and the lab was gone. The sound of the grass wasn't coming from a field. I looked down, and my knees weren't on white tile anymore. I was kneeling on a low-pile office carpet, gray, a little worn in the high-traffic areas. I knew this carpet. I'd walked over it every morning for 3 years. But the lights were dimmed, the way they are when the cleaning crew is halfway through their shift, and the only sound is the hum of the HVAC system. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, like I was moving through waist-deep water. I looked at my hands. The black ink was still there, stained into the whorls of my fingerprints, but it wasn't bubbling anymore. It was just dry. "The office is closed," I said. I didn't know who I was talking to. I just felt like I needed to state the status of the room. It's what I do. I manage the status. I turned around, and he was sitting at my desk. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a plain, work-worn shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He was looking at my legal pad, the one where I'd been taking the 9 a.m. notes. He looked like he belonged there more than I did. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like the person who actually built the building. I tried to swallow. My throat still felt like it was full of that black liquid. "I didn't finish the report," I whispered. He looked up from the pad. His eyes weren't empty like the clerks in the corridor. They were dark and steady. They felt like they were holding up the weight of the whole room. "The report is finished, Victoria," he said. His voice was quiet. It had a resonance that made the glass in the windows vibrate just slightly. "But I saw the vials," I said. My words were coming out in a rush now, stumbling over each other. "I saw the board. They're scheduling the hunger. They're filing the people away. I saw the Prime Minister and the ink and—" "I know what you saw," he interrupted. I looked at my desk. I saw my Uniball pen lying there. "Are you with them? Are you the one who signs off on the market corrections?" "No," he said. He stood up. He was taller than he looked when he was sitting, but he didn't feel imposing. He felt like a shelter. "I am the one who pays the debt they're creating." I reached out and touched the edge of the desk. The laminate felt real. It felt cold and solid. They said suffering was a high-yield asset. They said fear was the currency. "They believe they own the bank," he said. He walked around the desk and stood in front of me. "They believe if they build the cage strong enough, I won't be able to reach the ones inside." I looked down at my stained hands. I helped them. I filed the codes. I didn't ask questions because I wanted the direct deposit to hit on Friday. I'm part of the foundation, aren't I? I'm moving into the deeper part of this account now. The part Victoria almost didn't include when she first wrote to us because she was afraid it sounded too much like her own office life. But I noticed something. When she describes this encounter, she stops talking about the system and starts talking about the debt. I read a comment on a video last year from a woman named Clara who said that after her cardiac event, she couldn't look at a ledger the same way again. She said she realized that every transaction in the world had a spiritual weight that the banks weren't measuring. Victoria is moving into that same shift right now. He reached out and took my hands in his. His skin was warm, not like a heater, but like the sun hitting a brick wall in the afternoon. Where his fingers touched the black ink, the color didn't fade. It just seemed to lose its grip. It turned back into dust and fell to the carpet. "The stain is external," he said. I shook my head. I felt a tear move down my cheek, and I wiped it with my shoulder. I didn't want to let go of his hands. "I saw the labs. I saw the dates. November. They're going to release it in November. I have to tell IT. I have to tell the regional manager." "They won't listen to a business assistant?" "Victoria," he said. "Then why am I here?" I asked. My voice broke. I was shaking so hard I could hear my teeth clicking. If the schedule is already set, if the ink is already poured, what am I supposed to do with this? He didn't give me a list. He didn't give me 3 steps to save the world. He just looked at me, and for a second I saw the infinite corridor behind him, but it was on fire. Not a destructive fire, a light that was eating the filing cabinets. "You aren't a unit," he said. "You aren't a line item in their ledger. You are a witness." "A witness to what?" I asked. "To the end of everything?" "To the fact that I am still here," he said. He squeezed my hands and the warmth intensified until it was the only thing I could feel. The office started to grow bright. The gray carpet turned white. The windows vanished. "I have to go back, don't I?" I asked. I didn't want to. I thought about the hospital. I thought about the ribs breaking under the paddles. I thought about the 9 a.m. call that would still be waiting. "The audit isn't finished," he said. He leaned forward and whispered something into my ear. It wasn't a mission. It wasn't a date. It was just a name I hadn't thought of in 20 years. Then he pushed me. It wasn't a mean push. It was the way a coach pushes you onto the field when the clock is running down. I felt myself falling through the floor, through the dark, through the layers of Victoria until I hit something hard. Pain. It wasn't like the weight. It was sharp. It was a jagged piece of metal being driven into my chest. I opened my eyes and I screamed, but the scream was caught in a tube. My throat was on fire. "We have a rhythm," someone yelled. I saw the blue curtains. I saw the silver rails of the bed. I smelled the antiseptic, that sharp, stinging smell that tries to hide the scent of bleach. My chest felt like it had been crushed by a truck. A nurse leaned over me. Her mask was crooked. She had sweat on her forehead. "Victoria, stay with us," she said. "You're at Victoria General. You had a cardiac arrest. Do you know where you are?" I couldn't talk. I just looked at her. I wanted to tell her about the vials. I wanted to tell her about the Prime Minister and the ink, but all I could do was move my fingers. I looked at my right hand. The skin was clear. The ink was gone. But I could still feel the phantom weight of the Uniball pen in my grip. That was 10 days ago. I'm back in my apartment now. I haven't gone back to Government Street. I can't. Every time I look at a spreadsheet, I see the red X icons blinking over the grocery stores. Every time I see a news report about a supply chain disruption, I see the figures in the gray suits moving their fingers across the glass table. They're still working. The corridor is still there. I spend a lot of time looking at my hands. I keep expecting to see the black shimmering under the surface of my skin. I went to the store yesterday to buy a notebook, a plain one without the blue lines. I stood in the stationery aisle for 15 minutes just looking at the pens. I picked up a Uniball Signo, the exact one I'd been using. I held it against my palm, trying to remember the shade of the ink I saw in the laboratory. It wasn't black. Not really. It was a color that doesn't have a name yet. It was the color of a Friday afternoon when the sun is gone and the office is empty, but you're still sitting there because you have nowhere else to go. I tried to write a word. I wanted to write his name, or the name he told me. But the pen wouldn't move. My hand just stayed there, hovering over the white paper. I'm still waiting for the word that fits. I keep coming back to that one detail. The way Victoria describes the color of the ink as something that doesn't have a name yet. I've read a lot of accounts on near-death experiences, but I haven't found another one that treats the spiritual corruption of the world like a literal manufacturing process. It makes me wonder about the things we file away every day just to keep our own schedules running. Victoria mentioned that she still can't go back to her office on Government Street. She spends her mornings sitting by the window, watching the tourists walk toward the inner harbor, and she told me in her last message that she started leaving her pens uncapped. She said she's waiting to see if the ink ever starts moving on its own again, or if it's waiting for November to arrive on Government Street.